So we've already started this a bit with our intros, but we're hoping to do some self-reflection in looking at your leadership styles and different sort of management styles. Like I said, looking at some data, both that exists out in the world and that we've collected with young people we engage with around the current generation of young workers, including what are they like sort of prioritizing in the workplace, and also what are some of the more global factors that are currently impacting them. Some small group time to really practice how are we implementing some of these tools for reflecting on who we are, to then sort of turn that mirror on to how we mentor new staff. And then really just hoping to sort of open an ongoing conversation about supporting apprentices and employees, while simultaneously knowing that you're all working at organizations and companies, and you are responsible for keeping work moving forward. So how we balance supporting new hires and making sure that they can sort of meld with the work that's already ongoing. Like Shannon said, we'll be coming back together for another training in October, and this is an ongoing program. So we're really excited to hopefully have this group kind of stay connected and, like I said, offer some of that near peer group time. So I'm just curious, before we pop it over to sort of get into the material, are there any questions, anything folks were expecting to take away from the end of this? Any confusion? Or you feel good sort of launching into some of the content? Awesome. All right.
Okay. So you'll sort of see today, we're going to try to do a little bit of self-reflection and inward looking, and then thinking about how that impacts how we're connected, both to our peers, but also how we're connected as managers and leaders. And so it was very intentional that we started off with kind of doing a little bit of self-reflection through the quiz, and thinking about, just where do we naturally land, just so that we can bring an awareness to that. So now we're going to kind of shift our focus a little bit to how we're bringing apprentices into our work and like the working cultures. If we go to the next slide, we're going to just sort of show the support challenge matrix. And this is a way to sort of think about how we apply support or challenge to staff, and like gives us a chance to think about how our leadership style could play into this. So you'll notice some sort of descriptors on each one of these. If you look at the left-hand side where the cozy club is, that's sort of an environment that offers high support and low challenge. And then as we move down the quadrant, low support, low challenge on the left. On the right, we have high challenge, low support. And then on the top, where we're hoping everybody could strive to be, is that high-performing group that has high support and high challenge. And so when we say challenge, it's not necessarily challenges, but it's sort of how are we holding people accountable? How are we working through issues together? And how are we working as a group to kind of address the needs of the project or of the team? And so we know that these are not necessarily fixed states, and at any moment in time, any one of our organizations could really move into any one of these quadrants. But thinking about the culture that apprentices or new staffs are kind of entering into, it's kind of beneficial to think about what exists just naturally in today's moment in time, and like how are we taking the time to think about what these quadrants look like and the zones that we might fall in. So we'll spend a little bit of time just kind of going through each quadrant. So we'll start with the low challenge, low support, which results in inertia or apathy. And so in this space, we're sort of unlikely to interact with our people, or and we're not likely to take any action in what's happening in that space. And so in that scenario, not much learning is happening within the organization, which can lead to disengaged teams and eventually higher turnover rates. And then if we think about low challenge, high support areas where people are feeling kind of cozy. So maybe people enjoy the others that they're working with. People are dependent upon us and they require extra nurturing, but maybe there's not a lot of challenge that's happening to them, or a lot of accountability about how the work is being done or the results that we're looking for. And so, being comfortable could seem like a great idea, but it can often lead to a lack of development and growth, and have consequences in the broader organization when we're thinking about those deadlines and the other folks that we might be accountable to have our products or our deliverables made. And then the last bottom quadrant around high challenge and low support is where things are a little stressful. So if there's high expectations, high challenge, but we're not receiving the support we need from the leaders and managers, eventually that leads to greater stress, which can ultimately lead to confrontation amongst staff members. It can create a culture where people are feeling worried about taking risks or speaking out. And as a result, the individuals themselves feel less empowered to be part of that group and part of the solution, and may be less likely to share their ideas and thoughts. This could also lead to higher levels of turnover because people are feeling unsupported in those spaces, and ultimately just sort of feeling overworked and underappreciated. And then sort of as we focus on that last quadrant around the high performance, I obviously, like I said, this is sort of the ideal space that we're looking and striving towards. And so when leaders are providing that right amount of support mixed with the right amount of challenge or expectation, we're creating a culture where people can feel safe to explore their ideas, to think about creativity, and to kind of, think about not worrying about if something goes wrong, right? So they don't have a big fear of failure. If something happens, they know that they can go to the people that they're connected to and figure out a plan. And there's not a lot of consequences that come along with that. So this is really a place as an organization that we're thinking about that could lead to greater achievements, productivity, and overall happiness of the staff that you're connected to. And it encourages that individual growth and development, both, like I said, for the individual, but as the team itself. And it helps the overall teamwork and trust and communication that's happening in those spaces. So thinking about this, if we go to the next slide, what we were thinking we'd love to do, and I know the way that the folks are set up today is a little tricky, but we wanted to break up into groups and kind of think about where do you fall on the matrix, or where does your organization fall on the matrix? And for those of you in the same organization, you might have really different opinions of that. Maybe you have the same, but we wanted to give you a chance to kind of think about what's currently going on in your work. Do your staff members seem motivated, engaged? Do they seem afraid of making mistakes? How often do people introduce new ideas? And thinking about like, what is your default support setting and what's your default challenge setting? So again, no right or wrong, but just a way to kind of take that next step of looking inward, both for yourself, but the organization that you're a part of. So you can share as much or as little as you'd like with your partner or your team that feels comfortable, but enough to self-identify your sort of default or natural support setting and challenge setting based on that matrix.
That's okay. Do you guys want me to tell you about my challenges and our positives?
Actually, anytime.
Hannah's heard most of them already, I think, dealing with us leading up to this point. So I think it sounds like a lot of people have the same challenges, truthfully. And positives. I'm not certain though that it's funny because both gentlemen that I was in the group with were discussing that they felt like their staff was very motivated. And I think that I would say that's true for probably maybe 75% of our staff, and 25% of our staff I feel like probably just show up for a paycheck. And I'm not really sure where that comes from, because this type of work can be really fulfilling because you have to build things. So I'm not sure, like if you don't have a passion for it, I'm confused as to why you are doing it.
That's a good observation.
Oh, we're all back. Sorry.
Yeah, I think are we waiting for one more person, or did we lose them?
I think this is everybody.
Oh, okay. I thought we had 19, but that's fine. So yeah, welcome back. I apologize if the room's closed before everybody had a chance to go. But hopefully this gave you a chance to either share some of like what your default settings are in your space around support and challenge, and to think about like what you might need to do differently or work towards. One of the things we wanted to share in this space with just everybody is like, what do these actually look like in action? And so if you could name something that represents like your default support setting, like is there like a weekly staff meeting or a daily check-in or something like that like speaks to your support setting versus challenge? Like what are some of the tangible things that is happening in each of your organizations that we could kind of parse out and learn from?
Are you looking for people to chime in?
We sure are.
Okay, I think just as the owner of a company, I think just a really simple thing is like when, just saying hi to people, just checking in, how you doing, like make sure that people feel like they're visible. Doing surveys in your company, asking people how they're doing, what they would like to see happen in the company, where you're going. Obviously staff meetings, making sure that people's input is valued. And I think also, giving people the chance to take on responsibility and possibly feel. I know that's something I struggled with. It's like letting go, but like, I know that's why I left my previous job. It's just because I felt like, my boss didn't really care what I thought, or, no room for growth. So I'll leave it there.
Jesper, thank you so much for kicking us off. Those were all really great, really specific examples that folks could learn from. What about for others? What have you noticed, either in terms of like how you challenge folks in your organization or how you're challenged? What are those tangible pieces that you notice?
I can say that we do a weekly meeting, and I always it's a safety meeting and also an overview for the week, but I always take the opportunity to do some problem solving. So things that are coming up. And of course, there's like how many ways to skin a cat when you're in the building industry, problem solving. So it's good to get a bunch of different ideas in there, and for the newer people to kind of brainstorm about a lot of stuff and hear different angles and approaches to stuff is really good. And then we also do kind of a deconstruct often at the end of a project and say, like, where were the problems and what are creative ways to deal with those in the future.
Yeah, so really not just thinking about before things happen, but really being able to analyze and self-reflect as a group after the fact. That's really important.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else want to come off mute and share some wisdom?
I'll piggyback with Rachel. We work together. Another thing that I think is important is we sort of have an open door policy here of you're welcome to bring anything to the table, ideas, questions. And I think in general, people, like the general public, fear making mistakes. That's just something they do. We've never been the kind of management that look at you, point a finger and say, you've made a mistake. We believe in some ways sheltering the staff from that, and think it's management's job to deal with the harder things day to day, because we don't want that to break down the confidence of the staff when they're working. But of course, at some point, if multiple mistakes are happening over and over, then you do have to intervene and have a deeper conversation. But I think in general, whether people take us up on that open door policy is another thing, but it's there.
I love that. And the sort of delineating. Yes, thank you. Hard to find words today. Sorry, it feels like Monday. Yeah, to kind of differentiate whose job is it to worry about those things and how can you do it behind the scenes. And that really is management. So those are all really helpful examples. Thank you. We want to keep kind of on this trend of reflection, and thank you for those of you who joined the small groups. I'm sorry if there were any technical difficulties with that, but this time we're going to go to the next slide and look at just a chance to do some individual reflection. So if you like to journal or write down things, you could grab a piece of paper and a pen now, or if you want to just kind of think about these questions as it has pertained to your own experiences, that would be great. So I know we all talked about like our own leadership styles and management styles, and we're all in various positions where we might be leading teams. But when you think about like the person that had the biggest influence on your style or how you conduct your work, like think about a manager that you really looked up to or had an influence on you, and like where did you see them falling within that grid around stress, cozy club, success, and I gotta go back, inertia and apathy or high performance. How does that apply to your own management and leadership style? Like, did you learn from that person and take things that worked really well? Did you say, I hated the way that person worked and I'm doing everything opposite? So think about like who that person was for you and how it applies to your own perspective and styles. And then for your own supervisor, or it could have been that same person, like what's something that they do to provide support and challenge that you kind of noticed or have liked? What's one thing you wish that they did? And what's one thing you could try doing with your staff? We can put the grid back up for sure. And I'll just put these questions. So we're just going to take a second to just journal or reflect for ourselves. If anybody feels called to sort of share one of those things after the fact, we would welcome that, but don't feel like you have to be sharing for all. This is really just for your own time. I know that was quick, but I'm going to welcome folks back to the real space or the main space. Oh, and Kelly, thanks for sharing. Appreciate a laissez-faire supervisor because I'm highly motivated on my own. Don't really think our staff would enjoy that type of management, as I've seen many flounder, performance issues increase with that type of management. Yeah, well, that's a good tee up around the sort of follow-up question of like, how does reflecting on the ways that you've been managed or how you've been led in spaces contribute to the greater awareness of how you're managing others? So what's the value in doing a practice like this?
I think I can say, I'll just share this, that I feel the value in considering how you want to be coached kind of comes back to that little golden rule we were all taught about how, you know, the way you want to be treated is possibly the way others would also like to be treated. And I myself run a training where I ask people to think of their favorite coaches, and they write down 5 quick things, right, that pop into their head. And funny enough, you're never writing down that they're great at Microsoft Excel, right? You're writing down the fabulous qualities that they made you feel special or important or heard. So I guess, at least for me as a manager, I would want someone else to write down the way I made them feel, rather than that I taught them how to use Workday.
I love that. What's that quote where people often forget what you did and what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel? That's perfect. Thanks for sharing that. So yeah, I mean, these are lots of questions and lots of reflection, and I'm sure you're already doing lots of them. But it's just a way to kind of bring that conversation back to the forefront. And so now that we've spent a little bit of time reflecting on us, I'm going to pass things over to Lily, and we're going to talk a little bit more around specifics when it comes to sort of Gen Z within the workplace and what they're looking for, as well as some direct feedback that we've gained from the young people that we support who are also in Gen Z.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks everyone for being so engaged. So yeah, we wanted to, we often like to sort of bring things back to some data just to support what we're saying. And I did hear somebody in their intro talking about, managing with like a new generation of folks coming into the workforce. So we wanted to share a bit. I don't know if Gen Z is like a term that's coming around all the time in work, but that is sort of defined as folks who are born between 1996 and 2010. So really ranging between like, folks who are 14 and I assume not stepping into apprenticeship roles yet, but those later teen years. And then that goes up until age 26. So that may very well be folks who are working in their apprenticeship roles with you. So this data is collected from various different locations, but really some of the main characteristics that you'll see on the screen around what's important and what is defining is diversity. So Gen Z is, as you see, 25% Latinx, 15% Black, 6% Asian, American or Pacific Islander, and then 5% biracial or more than 2 races. So the workforce is, about 50-50 split between folks in these categories. There's also some really strong data around mental health in young people. So Gen Z experiencing, whether that's through pandemic times or beyond, high rates of mental health crises and mental illness. And also the fact that Gen Z are really sort of this first generation of what they're calling digital natives. So having an entire life that has included some form of accessible technology, whether that's iPads, phones, smartwatches, all of that, things that are really accessible immediately. So there has been sort of increased rates of youth mental health crises, but also in that category, really the highest rates of accessing therapy, mental health services, and then really prioritizing that need when that, whether that looks like sort of accommodations in the workplace or just a comfort level in speaking about sort of well-being and mental health. And then a really key takeaway that we realized in our research was around meaningful work and belonging. So folks in this age group or this generation category really valuing the ability to know that they're making a difference at work and sort of seeing that difference in the work that they're doing. So high expectations for support and belonging in the workplace. And I think this definitely harkens back to that matrix around how we're offering support. But then we did see sort of in the Cozy Club, what does it look like to offer support that doesn't contribute to sort of a lackluster balance of challenge and taking initiative. A couple other things that we noticed that you won't see on the slide. So things like financial pragmatism. So really Gen Z have grown up in kind of an interesting balance of watching millennial or maybe younger baby boomer parents experience both really solid economic times, but also the recession and more economic pressures. You know, I think many of us who are working and living in Maine see lots more conversation around, you know, housing and how we work in a state where costs are not necessarily always aligning with wages and salaries. And then really along those lines, aligning sort of both spending habits, but also decisions around what type of workplace they want to be spending their time in with moral compass. So really, again, back to that meaningful work and belonging, having sort of a sense of connection to work. So I heard, I think it was from you, Ashley, around some folks, you know, a very small percentage, it feels like people are just kind of coming in, getting their paycheck, but really recognizing that many people want to be connected in a more interpersonal and sort of global way to the work that they're doing. So we do recognize that obviously, you know, 1996 to 2010 is a wide range, but did just want to explore before we get into some data that we've collected through the young people that we're connected to. Just curious, does this data feel applicable to the young people and the apprentices that you're getting to know? Are there other trends that you've seen around this sort of new generation of workforce? Did you want to come off mute? You did? Okay. If you're in the room with other folks, it can help if everyone's muted and also has their volume down.
It was just Rachel. I forgot. I was running the volume before. Really briefly, we have not had any apprentices prior to today, but I can give a very quick example of a gentleman that we did hire right out of high school who we deemed an apprentice, not in an official program, but we were treating him as such. And we kind of faced a lot of these. I mean, like the mental health issue was a huge piece that we were probably ill prepared to deal with. Amongst other things, he also had a maybe on the autism spectrum or something of that nature. So we, you know, dealing with the ADHD side of that, the mental health, and also not fully understanding if he felt like the work was meaningful. It didn't feel like he did. So that's a roadblock for us. And I think that gives us, when we were originally talking to Hannah, that gave us pause about starting an apprenticeship program, knowing that we're likely going to get younger people applying for it, and how will we be better suited going forward to deal with those sorts of things.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? Does anything feel relevant, not like it's landing for you in what you've seen?
I can say, I will let you know I am a Gen Z, so take that as you will. I'm an older Gen Z. I'm a 99, but I would say that if we were to look at our stakeholder, who it was at the time very fresh out of high school, we hired them right out of high school when they started their apprenticeship program. We were really seeing the implications of the pandemic upon their learning and social progressions. So yes, they were very adept at using our WebEx tools and, you know, having that interconnectedness that maybe some of our older new hires at times can lack. But with that, there also came just a level of communication that wasn't there. And that was in and of itself something that we know we'd heard in all of our research that we get from Gallup might be a thing, but to see it in action was almost alarming, to think that the pandemic had robbed 3 years out of prospective Gen Z's lives and the implications of that on their professional and personal growth. And then we also see the generation Gen Z that maybe I would prescribe to be in, of our stakeholders that are looking at doing those internal apprenticeships and moving their way from that base job to, say they started as a teller and now they're going to customer service, so they're switching into that apprenticeship. We're seeing that they really they have a care, I guess. So there is just a greater corporate care, and a care of the company. So what are we doing? What are our effects on the world? And do they align with their personal, ethical, moral values? That's what I have.
Thank you so much, Iris. Yeah, that really struck me when I was doing some research for this. And yeah, and we did try and generalize some of the data not specific to the pandemic. I think that could be its own absolute slide or even entire workshop just around, yeah, what are some of the implications and how are we mitigating them? Thank you so much. So Hannah, if you pop the slide over, we, you know, these are larger trends, but we also did just want to show you some data points directly from our work with Opportunity Youth Programming. So in this slide, young people were asked to reflect on like what makes them comfortable or uncomfortable in general in the workplace. And then on the following slide, which you'll see in a minute, is more specifically increased comfort and discomfort in terms of onboarding. So, you know, you'll see some trends that I think replicate what you've shared. So really in terms of feeling comfortable, so welcomed, so knowing the people that folks are working with, knowing that they care, things like introductions, who people are, what are they doing, and then really being trained ahead of time. So feeling like folks are walking into spaces with a sense of what they're expected. In terms of what has made folks uncomfortable, so lack of consistency between folks who do the same job. One person doing something one way, another doing it another way, not understanding necessarily expectations, figuring out this way versus the way. So really, I think this comes back to a bit of like that individuation. So how are we providing space for growth, but also clear expectations? And yep, there it is. So when there are unclear expectations on using specific tools and things aren't broken down, so a lot of this really, I think, will also be shown in the onboarding. But then in terms of, you know, longer term support, so good communication from shift leaders, if it's a shift type job, or just those who are in supervisory roles, and then folks who are really jumping into the mix. So I think we see young people respond really well when feels like hierarchies are broken down at certain times, and people in higher supervisory roles or manager positions are stepping into work in the same way that they might be asking new hires to. If we pop to the next slide, we did get some information specifically from folks at Educate Maine around apprentices. Like if they're going to leave their apprenticeship, that often happens in the first 3 months. And if folks make it past that 3-month mark, it's a very high indicator that they'll complete their apprenticeship. And then 90% who graduate and stay for their entire length will stay on for a year or more. So this information is really sort of specific to how companies, organizations, nonprofits, whatever you may be, can successfully bring folks on. So I did just want to give folks a minute. I don't want to like read through these big text boxes, but just wanted to give you a second to look at when it comes to bringing on a new apprentice. I heard some of you are saying you're in the first round. Things that have made folks that we've held groups with feel comfortable, feel uncomfortable. We will share the slides. Thanks so much for coming, Jesper. So things like, you know, job shadowing or having a coach, I heard somebody say that like just saying hi in the morning, introducing themselves, feeling welcomed, knowing who to go to. And then in terms of feeling less comfortable, so lack of training, no accommodations. So I think that was mentioned in terms of, folks who are maybe more neurodivergent, knowing what accommodations are expected and actually, being able to meet those. Things like not feeling like folks are given equal opportunity, not knowing what to wear. It really ranges from the sort of specific tactile to larger organizational trends. And then in terms of ongoing support, things that we've mentioned. So check-ins, I heard folks mentioning like weekly staff meetings, things like that. Checklists, we really know that some young people work well when they have things written in front of them. Some work really well in conversation, interpersonal, opportunities for follow-up. So not just, onboarding and then expecting folks to be able to move forward without any long-term support. So we will send all this out. But when we look at the data sort of all, aggregated, it really shares a trend around trust and sense of belonging being important to new employees and apprentices. I don't think I could say that that's only specific to Gen Z, but I think we're seeing folks have more comfort in sharing that trust and belonging is important. So as we think about, the support challenge matrix that we reflected on, and some of those questions, we want to really talk a bit about how can folks build trust and openness. You could look at that, what helped you feel comfortable, and try and integrate those tips as tools that you use moving forward. But we also wanted to provide some specific materials around how can you build trust, build openness when you're meeting new folks. So I'm going to pass it to you, Shannon, and Hannah to the next slide. Oh, no, I'm not passing it to you. I'm going to keep
I can roll.
No, I got it. So yeah, we can leave it here. This is like there's a transition. So just curious, right off the bat, what do folks think in terms of benefits of spending time and energy? I know most of you, or all of you, I'm sure, are busy. You have full task lists. You need to be go, go, go. I think we're all in that position. So I'm curious, when you think about like pausing and really devoting time and energy on building trust with new employees, what immediate benefits come to mind?
I don't have a problem talking, so I guess I'll say something if everyone else is going to be quiet. One of the benefits of that is freedom to delegate tasks to people once you trust them to do the tasks, which in turn helps you take things off your own plate, which I think is, part of being a good manager is knowing when you can delegate something. It's very easy to say like, I just do this myself, I'll get it done faster, or whatever. But if they're capable of doing it, you've got to let them try.
Thank you so much. So you're kind of speaking to front loading. So it may take more time at the beginning, but the end goal is that longer term, that person is being empowered to have that skill that you may already have. Yeah, thank you. So Hannah, if you pop, just hit the next button, it'll show us our first point. So increased employee retention. So really spending that time to build trust and competency. Workplace wellbeing census data does show that the more trust that new staff have in their employers, the less likely they are to look for work elsewhere. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. When it feels like you're valued and you value the person who has spent that time building trust and openness with you, you're less likely to have wandering eyes and think about what else might be out there for you. If you pop to the next one, enhanced well-being. So as was shown in the data that we showed from the Gen Z, well-being does really matter to this generation. So trust and openness and building interrelational workplaces where folks feel like they can have, vulnerable conversations does reduce stress and workplace anxiety. And I think we also do see that with a generation that cares more about mental health, and there's more language around mental health. I think leaving stressful workplaces may feel more doable than it did in the past. And then if we pop to the next one, oops, I'm so sorry. The slide is misdesigned to show you the whole thing, but higher levels of productivity. So when employees trust leadership, we see that they're more open to sharing new ideas. So again, falling in that sort of higher productivity, matrix to feel like there's a significant buy-in to working hard. So again, we're trying to sort of decrease that sense of folks just signing in to get their paycheck. But when folks feel like, okay, there's buy-in, I want to learn, I want to show my team what I can do, I want to step into challenge, we see higher levels of productivity, and then also just more cutting edge work in general. So this is really around why do we spend the time doing it? And then we move into sort of how do we do it? So I'm curious, before, again, we show some data points, has anyone implemented any specific strategies in terms of just building relationships and, positive trusting back and forth with new staff? Anyone feel like sharing anything you do when you onboard or somebody new joins your team?
I'll share that at Jax, we have we call them 30, 60, 90-day feedback sessions, where we'll have someone who sort of serves as a mentor, not necessarily their boss, sort of outside of their reporting structure. We'll meet with them in small groups, like 3, 4, 5 people. That sort of all started together in the same, in the same week, and asking them for feedback on how things are going, suggestions for improvement of our onboarding and training program. And we get a lot of really good sort of honest feedback from folks in those kinds of sessions.
Thank you, Kelly. I love that it sort of flips the narrative. It's not feedback for the new employee, but it's feedback for the employer. I think that's a really beautiful practice. Thank you for sharing. All right, Hannah, so if you hit the next button, you'll see, one of these first tips. So it's really, again, why we started with self-reflection. So knowing yourself, really having some comfort with your leadership style, your management style. We can share some resources around specifically what is your management style. And then the values and beliefs that you're bringing into the workplace. I think we know this both in personal and professional lives, that increased self-awareness does, the data supports that shows stronger communication, especially, with folks that may be coming up in a different time. We go to the next one. We see practice letting go. So I heard a lot of this in some of the conversations that folks have been having today, but really allowing people to learn by doing, even when it means making mistakes. So having some wiggle room where folks are not necessarily in super high stakes positions, but they can try things, they can feel a sense of agency, they can get constructive feedback and, be valued for taking risks. And we see that this does lead to more independence and more resilience in employees. And then again, with communication, just openness, like opening the conversation that it's okay to make a mistake. That's not going to necessarily amount to, there's nothing punitive about it. It's a chance to grow and see where you can step into new learning and new opportunities. And then the last one is redefining failures and success. So really, like I said, identifying places that employees can practice a growth mindset. So being okay with mistakes, encouraging stepping up into new challenges. And I think really finding those niche areas where it's possible for folks to take on something new that they've got to kind of, muddle through the muck a bit, but that leads them to a sense of empowerment and shows them that you trust their abilities. So we wanted to, just sort of go through some of these tips because it seems like it's a nice time for folks who are thinking about their new apprentices. And I'm now going to pass it to Shannon to sort of keep us going in how we practice some youth engagement strategies.
Yeah, so I'm going to invite maybe 1 or 2 people to come off mute and just read off one of these tips from the list. So these are additional tips to think about aiding in trust and openness. So Callie, would you maybe come off mute and read one of these for the group?
Sure. I'll go with practicing self-care.
About David.
positive reinforcement.
Nick?
Setting clear expectations.
Rachel or Ashley?
You targeted us, you know we'll say it. Just kidding. Consistency. I want to say one, Rachel. You can do it right through mine.
Oh, show genuine interest.
How about Iris?
Sorry, I lost us. Which one do we have left? But if that makes you say it, then I apologize.
There's two left. There's two left. So
Great humor in play. Did we say that one?
no, there we go.
There we
Perfect.
go.
Thank you. And then showing empathy. So this can look a lot of ways, but these were some of the ones that especially work with sort of more vulnerable young people and young people that are deemed sort of at risk or opportunity youth. So just additional ideas to kind of put into practice. If we go to the next slide, we're gonna do another pair brainstorm, just kind of thinking about picking one of the tips that stuck out to you or the one that you think you might want to try, and brainstorming how you could implement that in your current work environment. So both like, how would you do it? What could potentially get in the way? And what other ideas do you have beyond these sort of 7 tips to build rapport and connections? And what we would love to do is we do have a Jamboard that we're going to drop in the chat. So I know some people have had a hard time with mute and using their the groups, so we can do it through the Jamboard itself. If you look at the Jamboard screen, we'll start on slide 1, tips you're selecting and how to implement. On the left-hand side, there's a sticky note, and you can add in like empathy, weekly coffee. You can come up with it that way. If you don't like to use the sticky note, you can also do little text boxes and then type right into the chat. And if that still feels a little overwhelming, you can always drop them in our Zoom chat and Lily or I can put them in. And just for time's sake, I'm going to keep moving us forward. So one of the things we wanted to share with you all too was just like thinking about not only those tips around building openness and trust, but kind of really going back to this notion of how do we increase support or challenge in the workplace. And so these are some of the ideas around ways to add support and challenge to things you're already doing. A lot of you talked about team meetings that you're doing, reflective practices, but here's some more tangible ideas around like setting specific boundaries, listening to people and what they have to say, reducing or increasing meeting times. Sometimes nobody likes to be in a meeting just to meet, but kind of like, how are we using our meeting times effectively? Or how do we need to have more times that we're doing touch points, even if they're in a shorter amount of duration? So thinking about like, are there deadlines that could be postponed, and reprioritizing and redelegating things as they occur? And then in terms of like increasing challenge, thinking about like what's something that they could try that they have not done before, asking for innovation and risk taking, helping your people feel empowered. I loved what Ashley said too about like the freedom to delegate. And so like helping them feel like they have a say and can grow. And then like really asking them to stretch themselves and think about courageous goals and what support they might need to get to those spaces. Love what you're adding here too about small ways to recognize one thing for individual persons specifically. Celebrate birthdays. Love that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That goes a long way. And so again, I know we're coming to the end of our time, but if you move forward in the Jamboard slides, there's kind of thinking about like choosing a support strategy that feels reasonable and doable within your organization. What would that look like? And then increasing like a challenge strategy. What is a challenge that you and your apprentice or new staff could do to increase productivity. So if you want to continue to move on the slides on the Jamboard, there is an opportunity for ideas around increasing support. And then again, the last slide is around increasing challenge, which we will send back out to everybody as a further resource that you all can think about. And those last pieces, I see people have already started putting some things on here, which is awesome.
Yeah.
I've never heard of a WOW board. Can somebody speak to that? What is that?
I put that on there because I literally just saw that in one of our hallways the other day, that like it's a team that they all specifically like work in the same area, and they literally had a bulletin board out in the hallway that just said WOW board, and everybody was posting like sticky notes that said like, wow, Rebecca, great job on this. Like, thank you so much for your help. Like, you really stepped it up. And like, there was at least a dozen sticky notes where like coworkers would say like, wow, you did an amazing job on a particular task, you know, the day-to-day, the small stuff. So
Love that.
it was cool.
That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. It seemed that's pretty simplistic too, right? Like that's not a huge huge task for anybody to take on. Just because we always like to be respectful of time, please keep adding to this. As Lily said, it's a live link and we can keep it going. So if you haven't gotten to your ideas around how you can increase challenge, please do that. We will certainly send these materials out to you, as well as some of the articles that we found just around some of the data that was shared. This recording will be made available to look back on or to share with other colleagues. Just is really focused around trauma-informed workplaces and how we can support young people and apprentices in who've had lived experience or who are dealing with mental health crises, as we kind of talked about here today.